Detective Dean Meyer is sitting in a room at the Spokane County Sheriff's Office when he gets an alert on his computer. It's late April 2021, a month after a 15-year-old was gunned down in an alleyway of an apartment complex in Spokane Valley, Washington, and the lead detective on the case had yet to make any arrests. But his fortunes were about to change. A few days earlier, he received a tip from a juvenile who, during an interview, revealed some potentially promising information about who may have been involved. If the tip holds water, this alert could serve as one of the case's big breaks. This computer alert is for a secure email from colleague Mark Voigtlander, who had been granted by the Spokane County Superior Court a search warrant on travel records from Alaska Airlines. Contained within the email are 4 PDF files, including flight purchase information. Detective Meyer clicks on each file and leans into the screen, his eyes moving from west to east as he's scanning through the blue text housed inside spreadsheet-like boxes, searching for the names and dates. Then he finds it. Tickets purchased on Expedia for flights out of Spokane. 2 of the names match those a tipster gave for who may have been involved in the shooting death of Preston Grzgorek. A month earlier, 15-year-old Preston Grzgorek is lounging at his friend's apartment fiddling with a vape pen. It's the night of March 29th when the teen was invited over by Ahmad McGuffey for dinner at the apartment at 9717 East 6th Avenue in Spokane Valley. Preston lived with his grandmother at the same complex known as the Village Apartments. "I got a contact who wants to buy a puff bar," Preston told Ahmad, referring to the vape device he was toying with. Just after 10:40 p.m., Preston gets up, daps up his buddy, and waves at a third party in the apartment before turning around and leaving. He then walks across the parking lot to make the sale. About 3 minutes later, a nearby resident of another apartment was on his third-floor balcony watching the parking lot when he sees Preston jog into view. The resident observes Preston look toward the south end of the lot and notice someone before running back toward Ahmad's apartment. Preston disappears from the resident's view behind the awnings on the north side of Building 3. Just moments later, Ahmad and his neighbors are jolted by the sound of firecrackers and screams. What they had just heard was the sound of 6 gunshots. Ahmad made the 911 call that brought police to the scene, which revealed Preston laying in a hallway. A sketch of where he rested was drawn. Police collected 6 9mm Luger-fired cartridge cases, bullet fragments, Preston's clothing, and a Puff brand Lush Ice-flavored vape pen. Inside Preston's pant pocket was a folding knife. He had no money on him. An autopsy showed Preston died from a gunshot wound that entered his left chest and passed between his ribs, perforating the left lung, heart, and right lung. At least 1 bullet went through the left side of his chest through the front and out the back. He was pronounced dead at around 11 p.m. "I really lost a big piece of me," Preston's older sister Nicole told Creme 2 News about the loss of the University High School freshman. Preston's death was even more difficult for the family because 2 years prior, his father died in a motorcycle accident. She said she helped her grandmother raise the teen. "I feel like I lost my own son," she told the news station. Preston was just a very outgoing, well-rounded person. Even after losing our dad, he still kept a smile on his face and made sure everyone around him was okay and doing well. He was very active within the family. His family meant everything to him. He was just a good person, very willing to help others. His smile could just make anyone feel 100 times better. Police interviewed witnesses at the scene, one of whom said she saw a white male about 6 feet tall, skinny, with short, neck-length brown hair who was wearing a puffy black jacket and blue jeans. She also said she saw this person throw a handgun over the fence and hop over it before retrieving the gun and running westbound through the parking lot. No firearm was located by police. Investigators also interviewed Ebony Pizarro, who was the third party inside the apartment with Ahmad and Preston. She said Preston never told them who he was meeting to sell the puff bar. Ebony, who cradled Preston's head as he died, said she tried accessing Preston's phone to perhaps see who he was communicating with, but she said it was locked behind facial recognition software. She gave the phone to authorities. One of the last people to see Preston alive that night was Eileen Casero. Moments before she heard the gunshots, the yelling, and the grunting, she had been taking out the trash when she saw Preston knocking at the apartment door of a woman named Aretha Red Thunder. "Are you okay?" Eileen recalled asking Preston. "Yes," she recalled him saying. Surveillance footage from residents of the complex and reviewed by law enforcement showed some of what transpired that night. The footage appeared to show the suspect wearing blue jeans, a black jacket, a baggy oversized white t-shirt, and possibly a gray hat. He is seen on the surveillance video loitering around a garage east of buildings 2 and 3. That's when Preston is seen walking north toward the north side of building 3. At 10:47 p.m., the suspect is seen sprinting toward Preston's last known location. Then the gunshots are heard. Because Preston was last at the door of the apartment of Aretha Red Thunder, investigators wanted to speak with the associated residents. On April 9th, Detective Meyer interviewed Aretha's niece, 17-year-old Daisy Red Thunder. 6 days earlier, on April 3rd, Detective Meyer had reviewed a Snapchat conversation between Preston and Daisy related to the Puff Bars. At 8:38 p.m. that night, Daisy asks Preston if he's at the Village Apartments, to which Preston responds, "Yeah, why?" She then inquires about buying one of his devices, to which Preston agrees. At 10:21 p.m., Daisy messages Preston telling him she is 10 minutes away. She asks him to meet her at the Hill, a secluded area away from the residential units, but he declines. She then tells him at 10:37 p.m. to come by her aunt's apartment. At 10:42 p.m., Preston sends Daisy a Snapchat image of the flavor of Puff Bars he has to sell. Seconds later, Daisy tells him, "Just aloe grape." At 10:45 p.m., Daisy snaps Preston, "You coming, slow-ass bitch?" That's when Preston emerges on the north side of Building 3 and walks toward Aretha's apartment, numbered 204. Seconds later, neighbor Eileen is walking toward the mailboxes that are located south of Building Number 2. The suspect is seen watching her from the east side of the garage. Preston is then seen walking away from between Buildings 2 and 3 to the parking lot, where at 10:47, the gunshots are heard. A Texas native, Daisy had lived with her aunt for a time since she was 14 years old at the Village Apartments, where she was introduced by other kids on the block to Preston. She said that while the two knew each other and some of each other's family members, they were just acquaintances at the end of the day. After not hearing from Preston immediately, Daisy snaps him again asking, "Are you good?" That was the last message she would send him that night. She never ended up getting the opportunity to buy the vape. Daisy said she had nothing to do with the shooting. In fact, Daisy said she would come to learn about the shooting outside of her aunt's apartment from a Snapchat post about 6 minutes after it happened. Daisy then made contact with at least 2 people about what just happened: her little cousin India Fuentes, and a Snapchat user named Stizzy Locke with the ID Steven.VRO. Earlier that evening, Morgan McAllister was about to head to bed in an apartment at the Village on Broadway when 19-year-old Stephen Yoler, who was her on-again, off-again boyfriend of 10 months, told her he had to leave briefly. That night, she arrived at the apartment she shared with Stephen and a roommate to find a group consisting of her boyfriend and a bunch of people associated with the 18th Street Blue Devils gang drinking in the living area. She joined them. It was at some point during the night when Stephen had asked one of the gang members named Rabbit to borrow money. Real name Julian Miller, Rabbit nods and sends money via Cash App to Matthew Holmberg to give to Stephen. It was only weeks earlier when Matthew, a friend of the group, sold to Stephen a 9mm handgun with ammunition for $1,000. They all went bottles up and scattered home later that night. Morgan did not know why Stephen had to leave, but she didn't press the issue because she had been drinking and she needed to go to bed because she had work the next day. She then lies down and closes her eyes. Not long later, just before midnight, she is awakened by Stephen whispering in the ear of his roommate. She looks at Stephen, who tells her to go back to bed. Tired and perhaps too out of it to wonder what's going on, she closes her eyes again and passes out. The next day, Stephen approaches her and tells her that they need to pack up their stuff and move out of the apartment. He instructs her that they are going to stay with Rabbit for a short period. At some point during this time, Stephen logs on to Expedia.com and books himself and his girlfriend flights to Reno, Nevada using the money he got from Matthew. A couple of weeks later, Caitlin Cooper was typing away at her computer, creating post after post in a Facebook group set up by Preston's family calling for justice in his murder. In one such post on April 13th, she offered a $2,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of his killer. It was sometime during this period that she received an anonymous phone call. The person on the other end of the line told her that he was a co-worker of a man named Stephen Yoler, who failed to show up to work on March 31st. More importantly to Caitlin, the man told her that Stephen had said at work that he was going to kill a kid. Caitlin also said she heard from India Fuentes, Daisy's little cousin. Caitlin said India told her she also believed that Stephen may have been involved in the shooting. Caitlin passed all the tips over to Detective Meyer, who by late April had already gone through the phones of Preston and Daisy, as well as witness testimony gathered at the scene. Based on these additional tips, the detective asked his analyst colleague to get a court order to obtain flight information from Alaska Airlines. As sure as the sun rising in the east, the data confirmed a Stephen Yoler and a Morgan McAllister had flown out of the county on March 31st. Reno is roughly 800 miles south of Spokane. It was there that Morgan and Stephen, who had this photo taken of him after he arrived, met up with a buddy and stayed at an apartment with others he knew in the city. While there, the order of business was to ingratiate himself with the group and then get some tattoos that he long sought to get. But these weren't just any tattoos. This Snapchat photo shows him in what looks like a hotel room with a Roman numeral X on his shin. The photo caption reads, "Big BDGZ, XV3 till the death of me, flexing bicep emoji." BDGZ likely corresponds to Blue Devil Gangstas. XV3 corresponds to the number 18. The 5'9" 135-pound Stephen grew up in the neighborhood of the 18th Street Blue Devil Gang in Spokane, which is well known in the county. In a subsequent photo taken back in Spokane, his other shin is tattooed with an 8. The X and the 8 adds up to 18, indicating he was officially a big dog. But while he was banging with his buddies, he was going in the opposite direction with Morgan. Morgan and Stephen were already on rocky terms, so when Stephen one day laid his hands on her in a bad way, she fled back to Spokane. Not, however, before taking some important information with her. At some point after the dust settled, the gang posted up film equipment and began recording a music video with Julian Miller as the lead rapper. Julian, who went by Osama bin Rabbit, had been making music since he was young and had been hoping to capitalize on a music career featuring raps, perhaps none more notable in this case than one called Creepin'.
All I'm trying to do, run numbers up and then suck it down. Oh, we think it's Joe's over here. We don't fuck with clowns. Better keep your distance, you get hit up with a couple rounds. Got this big old bear at your face, I would not make a sound. All I'm trying to do, run numbers up and then suck it down. Heard he said his fuck his own hood. We don't fuck with clowns. Better keep your distance, you get hit up with a couple rounds. Got this big old bear at your face, I would not make it.
A closer examination of the video shows Rabbit wearing a sweater with Stephen Yoler on the front and the words "Free Stizzy Lock" on the back. It's 3:10 p.m. on May 6th, less than 2 months after the murder, when Detective Meyer grabs a handcuffed Stephen Yoler by his elbow and escorts him to an interview room inside the public safety building for questioning. Minutes earlier, deputies descended on Rabbit's home at 512 South Coach Street and picked Stephen up on suspicion that he had something to do with Preston's death. He was wearing a Raiders jersey with the number 18 on the front and the back. After being allowed a smoke break out in the parking area of the facility, Stephen is brought back in and, after waiving his right to remain silent, started answering questions. "How did you and Preston cross paths?" Detective Meyer asked him. "I never met him," Stephen responded. "I mean, I know him through Snapchat, but I never met him in person." Stephen said he has a public Snapchat profile, meaning anyone could message him. He said Preston had at one point reached out and asked him if he was Little Breezy's big homie, to which Stephen told the teen he wasn't. "Alright, cool," he said Preston told him over Snapchat. "I understand you're legit, but he's not." He said there was no beef between them otherwise. "I understand you're affiliated with the 18th Street Blue Devils," Detective Meyer said. "I'm not affiliated, we're just family," Stephen said. "I don't believe you," Detective Meyer responded. "Why did you shoot Preston?" "I wasn't even there," the teen responded. "I want my lawyer," Stephen added. Just shy of an hour after the interview began, it was abruptly ended. But it didn't matter to detectives. Stephen was placed back in handcuffs and charged with the first-degree murder of Preston Grzgorek. Stephen was incredulous. He told a Krem News reporter from jail that they would have gotten him sooner if they had the evidence.
"If there was surveillance video that showed me at the crime, they would have grabbed me a lot sooner than over in a month and a half."
Detective Meyer knew far more than perhaps Stephen believed, even though it would be foolish to expect ignorance when concealment of the crime was not part of the plot. Nearly a month earlier, Daisy Red Thunder was at her grandma's place at 30 East Mission when Stephen messaged her about a plane ticket he purchased for her to come down to Reno on April 11th. Daisy had only known Stephen for about 2 weeks before Preston's murder. He had first added her as a friend on Facebook, and then she added him on Snapchat when Preston tagged him in a post. They exchanged photos and videos with each other in a flirtatious manner, despite both having existing relationships. Daisy would say that she didn't know at the time that he had a girlfriend, but Stephen would tell her that Morgan left him and he's alone. As for her relationship, Daisy would later say that it was pretty much dead in the water, so she was spreading her wings a little. But the 17-year-old was flying blind here. When she sat on that Alaska Airlines seat paid for by her flirt, she said she had never before seen him in the flesh. Stephen and Daisy would engage in a physical relationship after finding herself in the apartment Stephen was staying in. While there was lots of talk with the boys about Stephen's tattoos. Before she arrived, he had already gotten one done on one of his shins, and he was about to get another for the other. Inquiring further about the tattoos, Daisy came to learn that Stephen was from 18th Street and was affiliated with the Blue Devil Gang, a bunch of which was at the apartment. Stephen conveyed to her that the ink was a long time coming and that he had finally earned his stripes. In front of his gang friends, he was happy and haughty, displaying a toughness to his character and hostility toward rival gangs, Daisy would say. For example, when Daisy told him for the first time that her family had some affiliation with a rival gang known as the Deuce Avenue Crips, he told her she wouldn't be sitting in front of him if he knew that sooner. She said he also told her that it was easy to hide a body in the desert in Reno, but she didn't say it was necessarily directed at her. The comment, nevertheless, made Daisy nervous. Perhaps more so, because she had heard Stephen say he wished he could put Preston's scared face on a t-shirt the night he shot him dead. Fast forward to the end of April when Detective Meyer received the email with Alaska Airlines flight purchase information, which included an email and a phone number tied to Stephen. The detective then obtained a search warrant for Stephen's call records, which showed he had called his girlfriend Morgan 81 times. That prompted the detective to bring Morgan in for questioning on April 30th. When Morgan left Reno, she had some things to say, most notably about the night of Preston's murder. Morgan said Stephen told her that he parked 3 blocks from the apartment complex, walked over through the parking lot, shot Preston 6 times, hopped a fence, and hit a car on his drive out of the area. Matthew Holmberg, the guy who sold the weapon used in the shooting, told the detective that Stephen told him before the murder that they were having problems with the Deuce Avenue guy, and they were going to handle the problem that night. Matthew said he thought they were going to go there and simply beat up the guy. While it appeared Stephen was the sole shooter, Morgan said she had heard that other 18th Street gang members who were close in age to Preston had an issue with a 15-year-old. Matthew said Stephen, who by then had arrived in Reno, bragged about the shooting and laughed about how there was still blood on his shoes. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, it was discovered that Stephen shared with friends a Spokane News article about it. He updated his Snapchat profile to say, 6 block certified, bitch, I'm a made man, middle finger emoji. About 3 or 4 days after, he posted a photo of himself with a pizza and a salad with the caption, still eating fabulous. At the same time, Morgan said Stephen was scared and crying when he told her about it because he said he had to do it. Daisy also testified that Stephen appeared remorseful over the fact that he didn't know how young Preston was when he took his life. To reconcile the different emotions, Daisy testified that he only displayed sadness privately with her and away from his gang buddies. Stephen himself would testify that he didn't bring up the death of his grandmother to his friends, for example, because he was concerned that the gang would perceive that as weakness. And showing too much weakness was no stairway up the gang hierarchy, prosecutors would argue. He liked to post things, like post his beef, Daisy testified in court about Preston, alleging he tried calling people out. But a lot of people don't really care, because he wasn't going to do anything, she said, adding the people who he posted about knew he wasn't actually threatening. I've never seen Preston go out of his way to go fight somebody or do something, she said. The beef allegedly began with that random Snapchat message Preston sent to Stephen. Yo, you little Breezy's homie? You little Breezy's big homie? To situate us, this was during the pandemic, so turf wars moved from the ground to the net. We know that Stephen was a member of the 18th Street Blue Devil Gang, but Preston also allegedly associated, just with a rival gang known as the Long Beach Crips. Preston Grisgorek presented himself as somebody associated with gangs, Stephen's defense said. He knew the lingo, he was a tough guy, he had a lot of money, and he needed to be feared and respected. The rundown of the beef was that Little Breezy was allegedly dissing Preston's dead gang friends, and the 15-year-old thought that Stephen associated with the guy who was knocking down his dead homie's candles, so to speak. In one message, Stephen tells Preston that this isn't cool. This is not hood certified, Stephen said. Call me, we'll take care of this. But the beef carried, not necessarily between Stephen and Preston, but out in the open. Preston had posted publicly, allegedly trying to gain respect. Stephen claims he didn't know how old Preston was at this time. Preston allegedly made himself out to be older than he was and someone who had a gun, according to the defense. Then the beef escalated quickly. Preston claimed to put $1,000 on Stephen's head. This message, the defense argued, put Stephen on edge. It argued that his moments of private remorse to Morgan and Daisy were in part because he felt like he had to do it to protect himself. Putting it another way, he had to do it or else it was going to be done to him. When Stephen went to the village apartments that night, he went in plain clothes, the most notable item being his puffy black North Face jacket. The defense argued he was just going there to quash the beef, maybe rough him up a little bit so he would learn to be quiet. The question the defense asked is, if Stephen wanted to kill Preston over a turf-related problem, why wouldn't he be wearing his gang colors? Why not bring the crew? So when Stephen went into Preston's territory, the defense argued, he had to have been thinking about the possibilities that the 15-year-old could do something bold. Stephen claimed in testimony that he ran after Preston to try to stop him from grabbing more people. That's when Preston turned around and recognized Stephen. Are you going to kill me? Stephen allegedly asked Preston. Preston allegedly said yes and reached for something that Stephen assumed was a gun. That's when Stephen emptied his gun into Preston in what his defense team claimed was an act of self-defense. The defense also argued that Stephen had sanded down the gun he purchased from Matthew. It doesn't make sense that he would try to make the gun look nice if he was going to use it for the purpose of murdering someone, which would require him to dispose of it anyway, they said. But the prosecution argued Stephen's attitude and posturing before and after the shooting makes for a textbook case of premeditated killing. For one, Stephen responded to Preston's threat by telling him, "Yo, BB gun ain't gonna help you." Detective Meyer testified in court that the handgun Preston held in photos was, in fact, a BB gun because of the visible CO2 cartridge. Stephen knew, the state argued, that Preston didn't actually have a firearm when he chased a teen down and emptied his gun. It turns out he didn't have any type of gun, BB or actual. After the shooting, Stephen sends to a friend a message simply stating, "1K on me," with laughing emojis. 1K ain't shit. Mr. Yoler was tired of being the little homie prosecutors charged about Stephen. Mr. Yoler was tired of the disrespect that he apparently was taking from a 15-year-old kid online. He cared about his image, the state continued. We see that in the social media content. He was very proud of who he was. He was very proud of his membership as an 18th Street Blue Devil. He was proud of his associations. Julian Miller said that in order to move up in the gang hierarchy, you have to put in the work, which means committing certain acts. Stephen went for the biggest act he could commit to climb the ladder. What he had done would increase his position in his gang, the state argued. It would increase his position in his organization. It would increase the prestige that he has amongst his fellow gang members. So of course he wasn't going to bring the gang with him. This was his moment, and his moment alone, to show he earned his stripes, the state said. And of course he wasn't going to wear his gang colors, because that would bring unwanted attention to what he wanted to do, the state continued. But it was more than just a self-serving act for Stephen to entrench himself in the gang, the state said. It was also done for the sake of the gang. Remember the music video for Creepin'? Prosecutors argue that the lyrics were about the night Stephen murdered Preston. Listen carefully.
If he a real killer from Long Beach, why was he running in? But on the other hand, to be honest, I'm a little screw. Nothing to lose, trying to see blood up on these new shoes. Shouldn't have been up on the internet while he was tweaking. All that sneaking, that's the shit that gets you sent out.
The music video, the state argued, proved two things. That Stephen was proud to provide a play-by-play of what he did to Preston. And the gang was proud to memorialize it in a music video that can be sold and even viewed right here on YouTube. So proud was the gang, in fact, that the cover art for Creepin' and Creepin' 2 include Rabbit giving the finger in front of the village apartments and changing the unit numbers to 666, which, when added up, equals 18. In sum, Stephen's incessant need to post photos of himself with the weapon and telling friends about what he did to Preston with gleeful delight elevated his status as a tough guy worthy enough to get those coveted tattoos, cementing himself into the gang as a big homie. A jury didn't buy the self-defense argument. It found Stephen Yoler guilty on all counts. He is scheduled to be sentenced next month. But there's one question left to address. How did Stephen know Preston would be outside, right in his line of sight, when he shot him? As mentioned earlier, when Daisy was notified about the shooting on Snapchat that night, she messaged a couple of people, namely Stephen Yoler and her little cousin India. That night, at around 9 p.m., 14-year-old India left Daisy's apartment after spending the evening with her. While there, India saw Daisy messaging Preston about buying a vape. After India left, Daisy messaged Stephen on Snapchat asking if he was good. I put 6 up, he told her in response. Daisy claims she didn't know what he meant by that at the time, but eventually came to learn that he had shot Preston 6 times. By early April, Daisy had learned that detectives wanted to speak with her. After her April 9th interview with Detective Meyer, with the questions still fresh in her mind, she rung up Stephen to tell him what happened. Detectives suspected that she was somehow involved. Not taking any chances, Stephen then immediately went online to purchase Daisy her plane ticket out of the county. When Stephen and Daisy first linked up on Snapchat, he asked her if she was on the same bullshit as Preston, referring to the beef. She said no because she said she had no idea what the conflict was between the two. She was apparently more interested in Stephen himself. But that wasn't the whole story. It turned out she had her own little problem with Preston. Well, 2 problems. Problem number 1, Daisy testified, was that Preston thought she was hanging out with people from another hood, called 5th Street. According to Daisy, everyone beefed with 5th Street. Problem number 2, Daisy continued, was that Preston and India had a bit of a relationship at one point. Daisy alleged that Preston had threatened to slap India, which angered Daisy. While Daisy didn't tell Stephen about the allegation, she admitted to wanting Preston's ass beat. So when Stephen reached out on the day of Preston's murder asking for a favor, she claims she didn't know what Stephen's intention was. I need you to get him out of the apartment, Stephen told Daisy that day. That's when Daisy came up with the idea to ask Preston if he was in the area so she could buy a vape from him. At first, she tried to lure him to the secluded hill, but Preston didn't bite. Then she called him to her aunt's apartment. In the meantime, she messaged Steven over Snapchat telling him where Preston was going to be and offered him her aunt's parking spot to park his car. But Daisy had no intention of even seeing Preston. That's because Daisy had long moved out of her aunt's place. She was staying with her grandma's place at 30 East Mission, including on the night she had been texting Preston to come outside. India did not leave the apartment at the village. She left the apartment at 30 East Mission, where Daisy stayed the entire night. When Daisy told India about what happened to Preston, the little cousin knew Daisy was somehow involved, and that's exactly what she told authorities. Daisy was arrested in Sparks, Nevada and extradited to Spokane. She subsequently pled guilty to charges of conspiracy to commit first-degree assault and 2 counts of first-degree rendering criminal assistance. In exchange for becoming a key witness for the state and her performance at trial, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Spokane is said to have a bit of a gang problem. According to a 2022 Spokesman Review story, the county sheriff said there are between 850 and 1,500 gang members in the county. In fact, there is a dedicated website called StopSpokaneGangs.org, whose stated mission is to disrupt and dismantle the most significant criminal gangs and enterprises in Spokane and the surrounding area. Indeed, there have been more homicides related to gang violence than just Preston's case. Prior to his testimony in the Yoler trial, Matthew Holmberg was sentenced in July 2023 to 19 years in federal prison for his involvement in the unrelated shooting death of another teen. Since Preston's murder, Julian Miller said he has left the 18th Street Blue Devil Gang in part because he got tired of it. Perhaps if there is a lesson here, it's that time may help people move on. You know how teenagers are, they talk crap to one another, Preston's sister Nicole told KHQ.com. I never thought anything would be serious enough to take a young boy's life, considering he's an uncle, a brother, a son, a friend. I mean, he was only 15 years old. Ashley Lada, a cousin of the Grisgoric family, hopes there will be a larger lesson in Preston's murder. Preston was the sweetest kid I've ever met, Ashley told KHQ.com. Always there to make sure everyone was okay. He was loved by everyone. He always made sure I was okay and stayed sober, and I'm so thankful for that. It sucks I can't thank him and hug him, but I'm glad that justice is being served. I hope this raised awareness on teenage gun violence. It's not cool, and it can cause a lot of pain in the end. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to me narrate this story, which is based on the primary sources. Special thanks must go to the local reporters without whom we likely wouldn't know about these crimes. To the court clerks who don't get enough credit for the hard work they do to make these videos possible, and to you guys for input that I often don't even think of when doing these. I hope you all are well, you are staying out of trouble, you are doing nice things for family, friends, and even strangers. And please don't be Stephen Yoler.